Here we are back at The Naked Truth today with Lai-DuMone, who is the founder and CEO of worksmart Advantage. She does team and leadership development through creativity, and I'm so excited that you're here today. We met somewhat recently and just had the best conversation, and I'm really excited to hear more about your story and for you to share your story about being a woman in the workforce and all that you've gone through. Because I think our communities of future female leaders and some of our colleagues are always interested because we often feel alone as women in the workforce and think our story is super unique. But a lot of times we actually are all going through similar things. So thank you for being here and excited.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. So let's start. I'd love to just hear the beginning of your story and just how you started in your career and got to where you are today. Let's start there.
Sure. So how far back do you want me to go? Because honestly, I can go way far back to the fact that I am a Vietnamese refugee. I was raised by Vietnamese parents in an American culture. So I felt very disassociated, like lots of feeling like not belonging and kind of stuck between two worlds, right? So my parents really wanted me to act one way where I wanted to be and like an American kid and do my own thing and live into my own dreams. But for the very first, I would say well into adulthood, I did what my parents told me to do, right? I went to school. I got all A's. I went to college, not because I knew what I wanted to do, because I didn't realize there was an option to not go to college. So I went to college, got out of college, started working some odd jobs, went back to get my MBA. And I do remember driving, I live in Los Angeles. I remember driving up the coast to Pepperdine University where I got my MBA. And I was a surfer too. And I was in my three-piece suit, whatever it was, driving up the coast and looking at the surfers on the left-hand side in Malibu. As I drove up to Pepperdine, I'm like, I am such a sellout. What am I doing here? Like this was nothing I had done up to that point in my life was for me, right? It was to impress someone else, mostly my parents. And I think that continued into me going into careers. When I think about the jobs I chose, it was like, how does this look versus what's in it for me? Or like, this is something I love. It was always like, who's this going to impress? How's this going to look? And when my very last sort of like corporate job doing that was at a large pharmaceutical company. And it was one of those jobs I took. I'm like, I'm going to be here for 1 year as I decide what else to do. But I ended up being there 9 years. And it was during that time, I also, because I still had this entrepreneurial spirit, I opened a fitness studio. So I had a full-time job. And in the last year I was there, opened a fitness studio, got married, had a baby. While my baby was 8 weeks old, my brother, who was a police officer at the time, was in a head-on collision with a tree. So he was in an induced coma at UCLA Medical Center for 2 months. So literally my days when my baby was 8 weeks old was like, I barely recall it, right? Because like my mind was not really truly there. But our days were literally, I would wake up, take this little 8-week-old baby and just walk the halls of the ICU for 2 months, waiting for my brother to wake up. And then during that time, deciding to sell my business. So like making business calls and decisions in waiting rooms at the ICU. And not know if my brother's going to wake up or not. And he finally did. And it was in his recovery time when, I was really helping with his recovery that I decided I'm not going to go back, right? I'm not going to go back to work. I had this beautiful little baby boy. I saw how fragile life was with my brother. Like, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to do life this way anymore. Just doing what I think people want to see. And probably around 6 years into that career at the pharmaceuticals industry, I had this idea. Because I did training and development in this industry too, but in such a large corporation, training and development is like, here's a binder, read it, have people learn it, and recite it back to you. So it was during that time, like, there's a different way to do this. Like, what if I could bring my love of creativity into learning and development? So during this transition in my life with my son and my brother, I'm like, I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to drop everything. And I want this baby to grow up seeing his mom do something she loves. And, my brothers taught me that life is short. So that's how I started into this venture.
Amazing. I have 400 questions, as I'm sure anybody who's watching this or listening to this is going to have 400 questions as well. But, I think the first thing that comes to my mind is when I go out and I speak to career moms in particular, um, I often have this thought of how did you do all that? And I think there are so many women that I speak to that are new moms, right? And we have the idea of going through it, right? We're on the other side of that. We don't have the 8-month-old baby when we're trying to
Right.
work and trying to take a call and wonder if somebody's going to cry on a phone call and all of the things that we deal with. I'm just wondering, when you look back at that time for yourself, when you went through so much and that pause, like, how did you get through it? And what advice would you share with women that are also going through this time, maybe a different story, but have their own challenges through that moment?
Yeah. Well, I think there's something about women that we just get through it. When you ask me that question, and people have asked me that question before, and my answer is like, I have no idea. When I tell this story, I'm like, an 8-week-old baby in the ICU with a full-time job and a business. Like, I honestly have no idea, other than we know how to multitask and we know how to focus and just get it done. And I think that's a lot of women do that. My advice to myself, if I could go back to myself and to others, is to ask for help, right? Because we often do that and we do it alone, and we hunker into our just hunker down into like I've got this, I'm gonna do it all, because we have to, and clearly we will, but it's maybe not the healthiest way to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. And especially as like those strong, like, I call my daughter even from a little kid. And it's interesting because I have a daughter and I have a son. And my daughter, since she was 2 years old, her nickname was By Myself, because she would just want to do everything by herself. And it's just so interesting how there's like different um kids. I think you're frozen. I'm going to pause this. So I was with, I have a daughter, we call her By Myself, because from the time she was 2 years old, everything was by myself. And it's interesting how that is such an innate thing for women, to be strong and we can handle it. And I think that's such good advice. And wherever that is in people's life, right? Whether it's motherhood, it's career, asking for help isn't weakness. And I think sometimes it looked at as weakness. So when you got through that and you had this aha moment of, I really need to stop impressing other people and think of what I want to do and what's heartfelt and going to drive my career, what did that shift for you in the actual work output when you were doing it through a passion lens versus I need to impress somebody else lens?
So the way it ended up happening was, I made the decision. I think that's the first thing, is like, make the decision and be very clear about the decision. There was no going back for me. Like, this is the decision I made. I'm going to start moving forward. The how to move forward. And I remember, like, this is an idea I had in my head for 6 years. So it wasn't like I made the decision, I ran for it. It's like, I made the decision. Then there was a lot of like, but what if, right? Like, what if like it doesn't work, or how can I leave this full-time job and all these benefits? So there was a lot of ruminating for 6 years. But then when I finally did to make that decision of, I'm going to go for it, I just started doing research and looking into it. So my idea was, how do I bring creativity and into the corporate world for learning and development? I didn't know it existed. So I think I just Googled, right? So I just Googled and I found this course called, it was a 17-week online course called creativity coaching. So I joined the course, and it was to teach people how to be a creativity coach for other people. But for me, it taught me how to use the tools to start my business. And I would say the one big thing I learned from it is just take that first small step, right? My first small step was taking that course. In that course, there was a gentleman who was a speaker and an author of a book called One Small Step Can Change Your Life, the Kaizen Way.
Yep.
And do you know the book? Oh my goodness. So Dr. Maurer is now one of my friends and mentors. He's an amazing human being.
Amazing. It's such an amazing book.
It's small, it's little, and it's so powerful because it talks about the power of small steps, as you know, and it gives you the neuroscience behind it, which is kind of what I needed too. It's like, oh, why will this work? So that's what I did. I just took that one small step, took that course, took the next small step, which was like, okay, I'm gonna do some backyard workshops. So I just hosted a couple of workshops in my backyard, and then one day, as I was packing, I did these workshops at my friend's art studio too. And thinking like, okay, if I do this in the backyard and invite some women to it, so these women must work somewhere, right? So maybe I can get into the corporate world that way. But as I was packing my supplies to go to my friend's art studio one day to host a workshop, my neighbor came by and asked me what I was doing. And she happened to work at Google. And she gave me my first opportunity to bring my work into the corporate world. So I say this is because it's like the idea of we often are so analytical and we plan too far ahead. But sometimes it really is just taking that first small step and then seeing what doors open for you.
And I think there are so many women right now, I think just in the time in our history, that a lot of people are leaving corporate America and going into entrepreneurial careers. And that's a big step for so many women. So what advice would you give? So it's one small step, take one small step, but were there any big failures that you had along the way that you learned from that, you could give somebody advice of, if you're making this transition and thinking about this, what would that be?
So I think like mindset wise is believe in yourself, right? Just believe in yourself. And I had to learn that, but it's not just believing myself in terms of like I can do it all, but believing myself like I can do this. And if I don't know how, I can find the resources.
Yeah.
Right. So I would say I'm clearly taking one small step, believing yourself. And then something that I'm not good at, and I've still remained not good at, is strategizing. So I am someone who comes with an idea and then just jumps in and starts moving. And I'm 10 moves in. It was like, oh, if I had gone back and thought about that for a minute and created a little bit, not a large, like long-term business plan, but just some sort of strategy, it could have gone a little bit better. So I would say to start moving, take those first steps, but then also just kind of pause, and analyze and strategize. Like, is this next step the right direction? Because sometimes we just are fixing problems, right? Rather than kind of thinking about like, is this really what I want to do? Is this strategically the right move? It may be. And I think this is often, at least for me and as a woman and as a like people pleaser, like if I heard a comment or some form of feedback about my business, I would move to change it right away. Right? Rather than be like, okay, but great, that was one person's opinion. And is it the right choice for my company?
That's so true, because there are so many ideas, right? And it's so easy to follow this path and that path and that path. But
yeah,
coming up with the idea and really being clear on the idea, and then being able to look at the advice or the feedback and weigh it against your idea to make sure that advice is relevant to where you want it to go as an entrepreneur.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a company, I don't remember what it's called, but I ordered some clothes and they sent me this little postcard. I think about it when I talk about this topic. It said, you can't make everyone happy. You are not an avocado. So I think about that often now, like I'm not an avocado.
Amazing. What and just to sort of wrap up, and again, I could sit here for hours and talk to you, but I like being concise and giving people little bits of advice. But when you think about our future female leaders and a lot of younger women who are starting out on this career path, and or maybe going down this, making that change to an entrepreneurial venture, what would you tell your younger self, knowing what you know now about this journey that you've been on? What would you tell your younger self?
So I think it would be similar to what some of the things we already talked about, is like find your people, right? Find the people who support you, not people who are going to just say yes to you, but who are sort of like your cheerleaders, who will support you in the sense that they'll let you know when you need the critical feedback, and they'll always, and whether you fall or not, that they'll always be there to lift you up. I would say that, and then just a couple like kind of tidbits I learned as along the way. I read a book called The Prosperous Coach, and there are a few things in there that really stood out to me. Is number one, just have the courage to start and keep going. And then give people an experience of who you are and then what you do. Because we can get stuck in this idea of like, oh, there's other people doing this already. Why should I get into it? Or what makes me different? Well, you are yourself. You're the only you out there. So that's what makes it the way you're going to present it different. So it doesn't matter how many people out there are saying the same thing, doing the same thing. It's because of who you are that people are going to choose you.
It's the best advice. It's so good and it's so easily forgotten, especially in the day with social media and especially in the work world when people go on LinkedIn and it's like, oh, well, that person got a job and that person got a job, or that person's launching a recruiting, company, or that person's launching an L&D. How am I going to get a job? Look at all the people following them. But it's so easy to forget that there's millions upon millions upon millions of opportunities for everybody. And everybody
Yes.
is unique and everybody brings their own sauce, right? Like
Yeah,
their own
absolutely.
personality. And it's so easy to forget when you're just scrolling through social media and get into that comparative mindset. But it's so important. And I couldn't agree more. I do this in recruiting and have for so many years of how am I going to compete? Well, I'm going to compete because I'm Robin and there's no other Robin out there, right?
That's right. That's right.
There's no other Robin out there. So I love that advice. And it's I think a lot of people will benefit from that. Well, again, I will keep saying it. I could keep talking and talking, but we'll just keep it to what we had agreed upon. And I really appreciate you sharing your story, and I hope everybody out there gathers a little something from you. I'm sure they will.
Thanks, Robin.
It was so good to talk to you.
You too.